Jim Farmer, welcome to That's For Sure podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks, Carrie. I'm so happy to be here. It's so fun to see you.
It's so fun to see you. It's been, a hot minute since we've connected, but really we've known each other, I think, almost 20 years now. I think we crossed, if I remember right, it was 2007, and we met both working at Disneyland in Anaheim, California.
That's right. The happiest place on earth.
Or if you worked in custodial like you and I did, it was the dirtiest place on earth.
That's right. Also true. Both things can be true at the same time.
That's right.
Wonderful.
That's right. Yeah, that was such a fun season. It was my second time working at Disneyland. I had originally started in I can't remember if it was 98 or 99 when I was in college. And I worked through the opening of, first of all, I remember working New Year's Eve, 1999, Y2K.
Oh, right.
That was wild. And this was pre-California labor laws, 1999. So I worked a full 21-hour shift with no issue. You can't do that anymore.
That's a nice overtime paycheck.
It was awesome. And it was so much fun. And then opened Disney's California Adventure Park. That was really fun. And then left for a couple of years, actually a few years, and then ended up coming back in 2007. And I think that's when you were working there.
That's right. Yeah. And I actually started at Disneyland in May of 2001 at California Adventure. So I think we had and I was in a different department anyway, but you were already gone or leaving when I started. And then a few years later, I moved into the management for the custodial team. And then you came back and you were a new cast member. Then I quickly learned you were not new and you knew all of the things, and it was really helpful.
Yeah, it was so fun. I really loved working there. We worked at Disneyland together, but we also, I think, if I remember right, worked at In-N-Out too.
That's right. That was my first job.
Okay, same.
I forgot that you'd worked there. Yeah.
Yes, same. That's so funny. My first job too. I was in Fresno and started working there when I was 16. And then transferred down to Orange County store at the same time I started working at Disneyland. So I was doing both of those at the same time.
I mean, that's a great customer service duo on a resume. It still helps me today in lots of ways.
Do you still point with the two fingers?
Oh, absolutely. I cannot not point with two fingers or whole hand if I'm giving directions.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Or sometimes I'll catch myself saying right on, like they do it In-N-Out when you order fries, right on.
And I still occasionally just pick up trash on the ground in public, which, is nice, but also a little bit gross.
Yes. That's awesome. I see it everywhere. So I don't know that I pick it up all the time, but I'm definitely aware when there's trash on the ground. That's so funny. Or popcorn, Oh, that's so funny. And then you and I also wrote for a faith and culture website, conversantlife.com, for a season.
That's right. Yes. That was, I don't even remember how that I know that you had started, and maybe you were you my in to that?
I think so.
Website? Is that the introduction? How that intro happened?
Yeah. I think so. Stan Jantz, the creator, had invited me to write, and this was about 2007, same time that I had met you, and I invited you to jump in, and you did, and I thought that was such a fun season to write for that website. So.
It was. My one regret is not saving all of my blog posts, and I think it's faded into the Internet Archive.
It's gone. Yep, it's in some black hole somewhere.
Yep.
Same. Well, you now work for the Children, and I'm so excited to hear about your role and about all that you're doing with For the Children in your role. But while you've been in the position for not too long, working and serving and volunteering with For the Children is not new to you. And so I would love to hear how you got started in your volunteer work and how did you become aware of For the Children, and then what prompted you to get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. I love telling this story, but let me start with what we do as an organization. So For the Children is a national and actually international nonprofit that partners with local churches. And we have 3 programs. So we provide Royal Family Kids Camp, which is a 5-day camping program for children in foster care. We also have Royal Family Kids Mentoring, which is a 9-month mentoring program, and then a new initiative called Bridge to Belonging, which is a video training series that we'll talk about later, I'm sure. But, I share that to say, back in 2000, 2007, actually. So around the same time that we were meeting, I had a friend at church that had volunteered through our local church at a Royal Family Kids Camp and came back from that experience and really looked me dead in the eye and said, if you want to stay friends with me, you have to go volunteer at this camp this next year.
Awesome.
And so, at the time, I said yes. I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no background with foster care, with orphans, with kids that experienced trauma. What I did have were nieces and nephews that were like that same target age range. So I was comfortable with and, loved being the fun uncle with my nieces and nephews. And these kids were about that same age. And so I said yes and went that first year and just really opened my eyes to both like the hurt and the trauma that these kids had been through that I had never considered before, but then also the way that God was using like the people of the church to provide restorative moments for these kids, and just I fell in love with the ministry. So by the end of my first week, I knew I was in for a while, and eventually took over as camp director, still as a volunteer for that particular chapter for a number of years, right up until my second child was born many years later. And then, meanwhile, my corporate career grew and changed, and family life got busy, so I stopped volunteering, stayed a fan, and then that brought me to where I'm at now. When they came calling and had an opportunity, I couldn't say no to.
Yeah.
Even though I tried, but God had other plans.
Yeah. I love that. Sometimes that's the way it goes. And that's awesome.
Right.
That's awesome. Well, I want to hear more about your specific role. But before we do, you mentioned camp and Royal Family Kids Camp and your involvement there as director for many, many years after your volunteer work. But you also were executive producer of a movie called Camp, and which released in 2013. I wonder if you could share a bit about that, because it's a fantastic movie. It's on Amazon. It might be other places, but I know for sure it's available on Amazon. But how did that come about, and what were your hopes for that film?
Yeah. So again, that same friend was the writer and producer for the Camp movie. His name is Jacob Roebuck. He's still a dear friend today. And he was a filmmaker. And so we had volunteered together for a number of years at Royal Family Kids Camp. And, the challenge that we were having is we would take a week off of work, take a week of vacation and go to camp. And then, I'd come back to the office and people would say, "Oh, how was your vacation?"
Right.
And, they just thought I took a week off, right, to go do something fun. And it was super fun, but it was so hard to communicate like the depth of both like grief and joy we had experienced because of the stories of the kids and the behaviors of the kids, and then seeing those behaviors kind of grow and change, and the way God was just moving through all those lives. It was so hard to explain that at the end, that Monday morning when you come back. And so I usually say it was great.
Yeah.
Right. As I'm like choking back tears because I don't want to cry again about that story. And so that was a common experience with many of our volunteers. Also, because these kids are, kids and are, wards of the state, they don't get to tell their stories themselves until they're much older. And so, we were, like talking, like, wouldn't it be great to like have a documentary so that people could just hear like the hope that happens at camp? But we can't do a documentary because you can't get permission to film the kids, and that would be, inappropriate in all sorts of ways and that sorts of things. So what we decided to do was write a dramatized film that just pulled from the years and years of stories and experiences that had happened. And so that really gave birth to the camp film that we wrote and produced. And it was, an amazing experience. So the goal of the film was to really tell the stories in an engaging way for folks that had never been to camp and had always wondered what it was. And it really accomplished that in spades. And in fact, to this day, there are new chapters in the For the Children network that started because someone stumbled upon the film on Amazon or on Netflix when it was on Netflix, and we're like, what is this thing? And then Googled us and started a camp.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's a fantastic movie. So I recommend it. And it does give folks a picture. Like you said, it can't be actual for the protection of the children, but it gives folks a picture, an idea of the real life issues that those in foster care and those in those situations, the trauma that they feel, and some of the effects of that through behavior and other activities. But it also gives such a picture of hope of why this work is so important and of the transformation that can take place in one's life when they just have someone sit with them, show up with them, see them.
Right.
Relate to them on some level. That's the thing. We can all relate on some level with each other. And so I think the film does a really good job of holding both of those truths at the same time.
Right. Yep. I agree. And it's, it's an uncomfortable truth too, because you don't, in a movie, we try to show, right, that at the end of the week, for the kids, but that's also not always the real life, right? Like so many, of the kids leave and we just don't know what's going to happen, what God is going to continue to do. And, that's the honor and the privilege of this ministry is it requires patience, right? Because sometimes you see that fruit right away. And, we all make peace with like, oh yeah, we won't know what happened in the life of that child because of the week they spent with us in the camp or in the mentoring program until we're on the other side of heaven and, meet them again there because you just, people go into different situations. So.
Yeah. And you just touched on something I wanted to talk to you about actually is you're holding on to some hope that you will know or hear about or learn about some transformation at some point, whether in this life or in eternity. But I wonder for someone in your shoes that has been involved in this ministry for so many years, how have you personally been able to remain hopeful and keep your hope alive in the midst of, I'm sure, you've experienced and seen and heard dozens of very, tragic stories, especially, involving these children. How have you not been overwhelmed by it that you've walked away, yet it seems that you've leaned in even further? And how have you remained in a position of hope through all that you've experienced?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the perfect Sunday school answer, but it's Jesus. Like putting our hope in Jesus, knowing that he sees and loves these kids even more than we can imagine is what I have to anchor my hope in. And, sometimes it is easier said than done. Sometimes anchoring that hope in Jesus feels like a prayer that I am just saying. But I know that even like the faithfulness of saying that prayer, like he hears and he honors it. And it's really more for me than for him because he will see and care for them. And recognizing that he is weaving into these stories in, ways that we will never know and just kind of finding that peace with that. I learned this and a lot of our volunteers learned this after they finished their first camper mentoring program, which is, I don't know if I ever actually truly understood what like deep faith looked like until I said goodbye to those kids at the end of the week. And for the first time in my like kind of comfortable American Christian life, realized like, oh, these are like, this is a thing out of my control. And I have no choice but to trust God to care for these kids because I can't care for all 50 kids that were in our program. I can't follow through in the lives of all 50 kids for the rest of their life. I have to just trust that the Lord is going to see them and continue to bring them healing. And, and to this day, that's an anchor and a cornerstone of how my faith has grown in all sorts of aspects, even outside of, trauma-informed care and raising, with foster kids, but raising my own children and my own family. The other thing I'll say is the Lord is kind and gracious, and he finds ways for us to see glimpses of what he's doing in the lives of these kids. And sometimes it's in huge ways, right? Sometimes the kids come back and volunteer as teenagers or as adults, which is always an awesome thing. And sometimes it's in small ways. Like I remember a couple of years ago, I walked into the local Benihana for dinner with my family, and the hostess checked us in. She was a young gal, maybe 19, 20 years old. And then a few minutes later, as we were waiting, she comes around and she goes, "Are you Director Jim?" And I have to be honest, I did not recognize her.
Sure.
Um, I probably last time I saw her, she was 11. So that's, a lot of things
Yeah.
changed. But as soon as she said Director Jim, I knew who she was. And I
Mm.
knew she was one of my campers from one of my Royal Family Kids camp years ago. And
Wow.
even just that little moment to know, okay, like she's here, she's got a job, she's working hard, and she's got a smile on her face. Like it's just this little glimpse of hope that God is still moving in her life. And that's the graciousness of our Lord. So
Yeah. That's incredible. And I love those stories and you get to see the glimpse of someone.
mhm.
Okay. It's hard to experience heartache and trauma and terrible situations in kids and not feel like you want to run and fix it. And
Right.
instead, you've got to go to Jesus, the best Sunday school answer there is, really the only Sunday school answer there is, because only he can work something good out of
Mhm.
the mess of sin. And so I think that's something that we can be encouraged by let's just let Jesus do his thing, but show up and love and just be present with kids
Right.
in need. So, well, tell me about your role now that you're no longer a volunteer, you are a staff person, tell me about your role with For the Children.
Yeah, so I have the honor and the privilege of training our volunteers on how to run these programs successfully. So, myself and my team work with new chapters and existing chapters to train brand new directors on how to run a camp program or how to run a mentoring program, or for our existing chapters, new leaders that are coming up to take over, maybe succession planning for that role. And so we get to find new ways of connecting with them, of keeping them, at the forefront of what trauma-informed care looks like. We actually use a a philosophy, a model of training called trust-based relational intervention, which is a research-based form of care for kids that have experienced trauma that came out of Texas Christian University.
Mm-hmm.
And we've partnered with them and found ways to involve the principles of TBRI, as we call it, into our program. So I'm training our staff and our volunteers on what that looks like, and how they can bring that to life in their programs, and the nuts and bolts of running this ministry through their local church in their community successfully. How do you partner with social services? How do you fundraise in the community? How do you recruit volunteers? How do you implement our safety parameters to keep the children safe in the programs, both physically and then, from, being a safe adult perspective as well. And the fun part for me is I get to see new chapters coming in for the first time with kind of that fear and anxiety of like, okay, how are we actually going to do this? And
Sure.
then, at the end of the training going like, I know all of your questions aren't answered. You're probably still just as anxious as you were before, but now you're equipped with a lot more information than you had at the start. And you've got a whole network of folks that are here to support you along the way. So I love, being able to play that role for people.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a perfect fit for you, Jim. I think is with your experience and volunteer work and all that preceding you, I think you're in the perfect job. I know folks can go to the For the Children website, and we'll link to it in the show notes, and they can see some of the current state of foster care in our country and see some statistics. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on the bad news there, but I would like to know from your perspective, what is the current situation of foster care, on a nationwide scale? Like, what does it look like? Is it growing, or, how is it changing? And what should we be aware of so that we know how to pray or, respond to just the current state of our children that need a home?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question, and I don't have the, most up-to-date statistics at the forefront for foster care because it does change and it varies county by county. But I can say that there is still a deep, deep need for care for kids in the system. different states and different counties are evolving in what care looks like. In California, for example, over the last couple of years, we've been moving away from, the more institutionalized care into more placement in
Mhm.
families versus group homes, which is good because when,
Right.
trauma has happened, in relation, being able to build relationship with healthy adults, which is really also the cornerstone of our programs,
Yeah.
really just serves the kids, even though it requires a lot more logistics and a lot more folks willing to sign up to be
Sure.
foster families. Um, so there's always, and there's also a higher focus now on family placement, right? So maybe finding an aunt and uncle or grandparent that can step in and care for that child while their parent or primary caregiver is getting whatever help it is that they need. Obviously, there's been, lots of influence and changes based on just even some of, the drug crisis and the
Yeah.
country as drug use and abuse increases, right? That has a direct impact oftentimes on foster care numbers. So
Sure.
there is a lot of need. And, one statistic that's always stood out to me that still stands today is that there are more churches in the US than there are children in foster care. So
Mm.
if every church had one foster family, right, then there would no longer be children in, foster care without, placement. So, um, so that's one area, but obviously like stepping into foster care is a daunting proposition and also not logistically possible for
Sure.
many, many believers. And so what I love and what I want people to know is like there is a place for everyone to serve children in foster care in your community. Our camp and mentoring programs are a really great example because you don't have to sign up to be a foster family, which is obviously a huge life change. You can just sign up and serve for a week or help volunteer at check in and check out. And every chapter needs help with volunteers in their communities. But also, if there is a foster family in your church community, finding ways to provide care and support for them. And there's so many nonprofits in this space that are helping churches kind of figure this out. Whether it's getting trained to be a babysitter or respite care, so that family can go have a date night and have a safe, approved adult, watch their foster kiddo or kiddos while they're out, is a huge need and a huge help for that family. Even preparing your church spaces for kids that have experienced trauma
Mm.
can be a graciousness that the church can offer in a meaningful way. And that's also why we launched our third initiative that I mentioned earlier, Bridge to Belonging,
Yeah.
just this last year. And that's actually a free resource. You can find it on our website as well. It's a 7-video training series that individuals and churches and congregations can go through together to learn like the basics of what trauma-informed care look like,
Okay.
and how to then flex and adapt the ways that you connect with kids that walk through your doors to meet their needs, right? One
Mm.
example I can share is a lot of kids that have experienced trauma often are overwhelmed in loud environments. And
Sure.
many of our churches, not all, but many have loud worship fans and worship teams, which is, so great in so many ways. But even just a simple act of making like headphones available for kids that are
Mm.
overstimulated by that loud noise then calms their nervous system down
Sure.
so that they can actually participate in the worship and engage and then
Yeah.
hear, the word of God and how much they're loved,
Hmm.
from the pulpit.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like an incredible resource. So we'll definitely link to that in show notes. I want to check it out myself. So I'm sure others will as well. But I love that there is a place for everyone, as I think
Mhm.
often we can see the statistics or hear the statistics and get overwhelmed. And oftentimes that paralyzes us. But from what I'm hearing from you, there is a place for every person that has a desire to serve. There's something for them that they could do. We might not change the whole system, but we could certainly play a small part in a much larger story that I
Right.
believe God is telling through brokenness and through this issue specifically.
Yeah. And even just to add one little example too, oftentimes when people hear about camp, you think kids summer camp, right? And most of our church camps are staffed with college age volunteers chasing after their kids, and that is often the case for our camps for some of the roles. But our camps and our mentoring programs also very intentionally have multi-generational roles available. Every camp, for example, has a camp grandpa and grandma. And their job at camp is to be camp grandpa and grandma. And it looks different in every chapter. Some, have, story time or cookies with grandma and grandpa, or grandma and grandpa go, through in the evenings and pray for all of the kids at night and for bedtime and that sort of thing. But even if they don't have like specific jobs throughout the week, the kids call them grandma and grandpa. And it models some of that healthy family dynamic for some of the kids that may not have seen that in their past. And so when I say there's a role for everyone, there is a role for everyone in the programs. I have fond memories of my own parents volunteering as the camp grandma and grandpa when I was the director, and my then 74-year-old dad who walked with he walks with a gait after a stroke, blew the minds of every child at camp when he somehow managed to climb up the pole for the zip line and zip line down. And to this day, when I see some of those older campers, like, I can't believe Grandpa Doug did the zip line. So roll for
Incredible.
everyone, and it's so fun.
Incredible. And you might get to do a zip line,
That's
along the
right.
way. You never know. Yeah, you
You
never
never
know.
know.
That's so great. I love it so much. So I don't want to focus on the statistics, but I do want to know from your perspective what you see God doing through the current situation. So is there a story that you can share of where you've really seen God at work? And it could be in any area for the children, but what's the story that you see God telling through your involvement with For the Children?
I see a story of continual redemption. We talked earlier about, like, we don't always hear the stories of like what has gone on with the kids, but even in our organizational life, we've been around now for 41 years, and we just brought on our first board member, who is a program alumna. And she has an incredible story of her own of both deep trauma and heartache and abuse that has happened to her when she was a child, and then finding um, a sense of normalcy as a child at a Royal Family Kids camp in her community. And then that actually grew into her being adopted by one of the volunteers from that camp. So she found her forever family through one of our programs, and then has since gone on to not only graduate from high school, but graduate from college, and then went on to get her master's degree, and is now a assistant principal at a middle school in her community, where she in turn is helping all of the kids at her school, but kids that experience big behaviors like she had when she was a camper, and some have come through the foster care system in her public school as well. So so I see that even though the numbers are daunting, God sees every child in that statistic, and every child in the system, every statistic just needs a caring adult to come alongside them and provide them some hope. And we've seen that happen with stories like I just shared, and stories that we don't even know about. But I know that there are other kids that are desperately wanting that one caring adult to come into their life in some form or fashion to give them that hope and that picture of really what God's kingdom looks like.
That's a wonderful story. And it's neat to think about. That's just one individual. And that's, and that Jesus is multiplying that restorative story over and over in his timing, in his goodness, in his kindness, like you said, over and over in his way. And that's super encouraging. That's awesome for her. I love hearing that.
Yeah. And it breaks the generational cycle too,
Absolutely.
right? Oftentimes, like, the caregivers, that have caused the trauma are just repeating patterns that they have experienced. And so to know that God is redeeming and restoring those generational, that generational brokenness is humbling.
It's humbling and it's incredible to
Yeah.
see. Jim, I'm curious how this work and the involvement that you've had, how has it changed you personally?
Mm. Um, it really, I think I alluded to this earlier, but it deepened my faith in a way I didn't know possible.
Mm.
Everyone comes into this with a different story and experience. And, I would say I kind of came in as a fairly like comfortable Christian. I had some personal, hardships and things that, were happening even when I first volunteered. But, um, just recognizing that even in our own kind of, hard seasons, God can use us to help deepen the faith of others, has been incredible. And really learning what true open-handed faith looks like, has
Yeah.
been transformative for me. That has carried me through multiple hard seasons as an adult. Job loss, losing a parent-in-law and kind of walking through that grief, figuring out how to parent my own, children, and both, with things that I've learned from working with kids that have been in foster care through our programs, but also like recognizing that like our children's lives are like Jesus, they're Jesus's, they're not mine. And so being very open-handed with like our expectations of what God's going to do with them, with a lot of trust. It really has marked both my faith and my wife's faith. And we hope it's leaving a mark on the lives of our kids too. I mean, we ended up letting our 12-year-old go on her first overseas international mission trip this year,
Okay.
um, with her school, which was incredible opportunity for her. But a lot of folks were like, she's 12 and you're letting her go to a country that you've never been to before. And I don't know if I would have been as comfortable with it if it weren't for that open-handed faith I've learned,
Yeah.
by just having a front row to this type of ministry.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That is great. And it comes straight from the kindness of Jesus and allowing
Mhm.
us to walk this adventurous faith walk with him and really following his lead, not always knowing what we're getting into, but trusting that he does and he's already present. And I love that. And Jim, I think you are the perfect fit for the role that you're in. And like I said up top, I mean, you've been a great encourager to me, just watching you do your thing, even from afar. But watching you follow the lead of Jesus has been an incredible blessing, and I think you're a wonderful testimony to his kindness and his
Mhm.
goodness and his hope. And I'm super excited just to see, to watch him continue to use you to bless these sweet children and, that just are so desperate for his love. And the fact that they get you and the team and so many others with For the Children who just love them desperately to walk alongside them and to show up with them is a beautiful thing. And so I have just one last question for you, Jim. Well, I'm so grateful for your time here in this conversation. But the show's called That's For Sure because I love to talk with folks like yourself who are anchored in the hope that they have in Jesus and are confident in who he is, which enables you to do what you're doing. And so, what would you say is just one thing? I know there are many, but what is one thing that you are absolutely sure is true about the Jesus that you follow?
Oof, what a great question. And I am absolutely sure that the Jesus that I follow loves us, sees us, and uses us even when we think we're not worthy. He does not see us that way. He sees us through the lens of our redemption. And when we feel like we're not good enough or capable enough or uh, sin free enough, he sees otherwise and is inviting us to step in faith and say yes to him. That's for sure.
That's for sure. Yes. Oh, I love it. He's so kind, and we can be so
Good.
sure of that. So yeah, well, Jim, I could talk to you all day about the wonderful work that you are doing. I'm very, very grateful that you took the time to share with us, with me, with our listeners about the work of For the Children. We're going to link to all the things in the show notes so that folks can have a chance to do some more digging in and just praying about how they might be involved. I love the stories of hope that you've shared, and I'm super grateful to know you and just really grateful for your time. So thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, Carrie. It was my pleasure, and it was great sharing these stories and catching up with you.